I'm Jim Carney.
And I'm Linda Hirsch.
And this is Edcast, a program produced and created by educators for everyone interested in education.
It is no secret that the performance of American students in mathematics is declining. International data reveal that American students are scoring lower in math than their peers in Europe and Asia. We seem destined to lose our competitive edge if we cannot produce citizens who are literate in math and science. What's gone wrong? What can be done in classrooms to improve student math abilities? Today, we'll speak with advocate Elizabeth Carson of New York City Hold to examine the programs and policies that might make a difference in math education.
And later in the program, I'll visit with some academic experts and get their opinion on the issue. But first, to the studio with Linda and her guest.
My guest today is Elizabeth Carson. She is co-founder and executive director of New York City Hold National, a nonpartisan organization created to improve the quality of mathematics education in our nation's schools. Welcome to Edcast, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
What is New York City Hold, and why did you found it?
Well, it's a coalition of parents, teachers, school board members, administrators, higher ed faculty, members of the press even, and some elected officials from time to time. And we work on various projects at the local, state, and national level to affect change in math education in the ways that we think it needs to change.
Now, you know, we opened up the program by mentioning that American students, their math scores are not keeping up internationally at all. What is not working from your perspective in math education today?
Well, fundamentally, the programs that we're using in our schools lack basic arithmetic at the elementary level. This is rather remarkable, but it has been the case for approximately 20 years. And so, regardless of what reforms we try to effect in terms of professional development or restructuring schools or lowering class size or funding, any of these attempts to reform education are not going to work if the fundamental programs, what we're teaching children, what teachers are teaching children, and what they're expected to learn is flawed. Okay. And that is the problem.
Now, you say there's not basic arithmetic. That's a pretty...
Sounds pretty amazing.
It's a pretty provocative statement, I guess. Does that mean that, I mean, would you say there's, what do you mean by there's no basic arithmetic? Students aren't learning how to add and subtract, or they're not learning the times table anymore? What does that mean?
There's been a fundamental shift that began in the late 80s. And it was guided by the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, which is an association of math educators. And they made some very bold steps in redirecting math education that included a de-emphasis of the basic skills of arithmetic. It's written in the document.
Okay, and what did they propose instead? What was their vision?
Their vision was for children to grapple with problems that require elementary mathematics and to come up with their own procedures. There are standard procedures of arithmetic called algorithms. These are procedures that work every time in every case.
Okay, can you give an example of what an algorithm is?
An algorithm would be column addition, column subtraction,
where you carry the number the way,
and long division. Those are algorithms. Now, there are some alternative algorithms that in fact are stressed in programs such as Everyday Math, which is the program that was adopted in New York City. And some of these algorithms are fine. They aren't discovered by the children, by the way. They are usually instructed to learn these, such as lattice multiplication. And there's nothing particularly wrong with children learning these procedures, but unfortunately in programs like Everyday Math and Turk Investigation, those procedures are emphasized over and to the exclusion of the standard procedures that children will need when they enter algebra and beyond. Long division in particular must be learned in order to go into polynomial equations in algebra and on to calculus. It is not controversial. It must be there. And what is controversial is that in everyday mathematics, it's not there. It is not the procedure that is emphasized for the students to learn.
So what does everyday math, I mean, its title Everyday Math lets me think that it's going to give students the things they need to use mathematics in their everyday life.
Right.
Am I wrong?
Well, actually, in fact, it doesn't even do that, because in everyday life, children would need basic arithmetic skills to add up what their purchases at a grocery store.
All right, so let's talk about this. I mean, does everyday math ask students to bring in a calculator, or do they add? I mean, where are we getting those skills?
Now, the thing about everyday math, there's a couple of things that make it the most controversial, although Turk investigations is even more controversial than everyday math.
Which is the one we're using in the New York City schools?
In New York City, we're using both.
Okay.
In Manhattan District 2, we're continuing with Turk investigations in number, data, and space, and the sister program, Everyday Math, is the one that the Chancellor chose. And the Everyday Math program has some distinct characteristics that make it extremely controversial and fatally flawed in the estimation of many, including seasoned math teachers, math professors, and parents whose children are going through these programs. The introduction of a calculator, which begins in the earliest grade, the use of the calculator, and the encouragement of the use of the calculator in times when you would expect the students to be learning, for example, in a multiplication exercise in 3rd grade everyday math. First of all, you work with a partner typically, and it will encourage or ask the student to find multiple ways to solve, for example, 36 times 7. There will be no encouragement to use the standard procedure for 36 times 7. There will be encouragement for the students to find several ways to solve it. It could be anything.
But that's not using the calculator.
And it says if there's a problem, check with your calculator. The calculator is a key component in much of the children's work, and to the point where it becomes obvious to parents in the upper grades their children don't know basic facts of arithmetic. Now, this is one of the red flags, is that a parent will see 3rd, 4th grade. That's usually where you start to know your multiplication tables. You start to use standard procedures. You won't be grappling anymore.
So are you saying that New York City school children are not learning the times table?
They're absolutely not learning what they need to learn, and it's quite evident from the assessments. Now, we know that we had trouble with our state assessments during the period of 2003 when Everyday Math was adopted through now. Once the test was re-leveled to a point that was reflecting the rigor that the state regents expected of students, we realized that the students really hadn't made virtually any gains in the entire time we've had Everyday Math. However, there's another assessment that's far more important and more reliable in terms of measuring math achievement in New York City and New York State, and that is the National Assessment of Education Progress. And remarkably, our students from 2003 to 2009 have not made gains in any measure. It is rather remarkable. In other words, if you pull out subgroups, the Latino, African American groups, or children in poverty versus middle-class children, none of these subgroups made gains. And in fact, they've fallen further behind from students like them in other cities.
Let's take a moment, because Jim Carney had the opportunity to go to the Courant Institute at New York University and speak with some math experts. Let's hear what they have to say.
Professor Sylvan Cappell is a founding member of NYC Hold and teaches at the NYU Courant Institute for Mathematical Sciences. I asked him how he thought math education in the U.S. is today.
Inadequate. That's to say, there are efforts being made. There are some good elements in the program. Our universities are at a very high level in terms of the research activities and the training at the most advanced levels. But the picture in K through 12 isn't proportionate to that and compares unfavorably to many other advanced countries, and even to some not quite as advanced countries.
Why is that?
Well, there's been a history of lack of focus on it. Young people have not been as encouraged as they might be to focus on mathematics. Curricula are not as rigorous as they should be. Overall, the culture doesn't support it as much as it does in some other places. And I'd like to see that improved. You want to develop both kids' skills and their interests in conjunction with each other, because you need both in order to move forward in mathematics. And in fact, the issues in mathematics are more pointed than the issues in science education, because in science you can leave elementary school with just with just a general positive feeling about science, know what it's about without being able to do science, and you're still equipped to go on and even become a scientist. Whereas by the time you leave elementary school, there's actually a whole set of skills that you need to be on top of to be able to deploy when you get to high school and then further.
Dr. Fred Greenleaf is also a founder of NYC Hold and a professor of math at NYU's Courant Institute. He has a somewhat stronger opinion on the state of math education today.
I think math education is pretty god-awful, especially in elementary school. And if you want to know the reason, it has to do with curricula promoted by a certain division of the National Science Foundation and promoted by the National Council of Teachers on Mathematics. And it's based on a radical ideology that just doesn't work. It's called constructivism. And I've seen representatives of the NCTM say things as ridiculous as teachers shouldn't instruct. It's damaging to the creativity of the little children. Or the way children should learn mathematics is to discover it for themselves sitting around a rug in little groups. Now listen, it took 3,000 years to get fractions straight. It's a result, the arithmetic of fractions is the result of a long period of development. Kids are not going to do this anymore. They're going to learn how to play the piano without practicing scales. And the thing that kills most students, as I know from my experience as director of undergraduate studies, is that they have terrible problems with basic algebraic operations. That goes back in turn to they don't know fractions or they didn't learn it right. And if you don't learn fractions so it's automatic, you're in a position as somebody driving a car who has to read the manual every time you want to make a right turn. You can't function that way. I really believe a lot of this begins with curriculum. If you have a good curriculum, a well-meaning teacher who doesn't know it can learn from the curriculum and actually do okay with the kids. The kids have books. Everyday math doesn't have a book. You can't take a book home. This was one of our critiques of the founder. We said, you're disenfranchising parents wholesale. There is no book. The kid can't bring a book home. He brings these little worksheets home, but no book that explains it. Parents can't work with their kids. In fact, they discourage parents. These programs discourage parents working with their kids because parents don't understand what these new programs are all about.
You mentioned the tests showing gaps in how all the minority subgroups are doing. Is there an achievement gap in math the same way there is in reading, and are white and Asian students doing okay in math?
Yes.
Now, are they doing okay with everyday math?
The little trick behind these reforms is you can put a program, an even worse program, for example, Turk Investigations, in a middle-class community, and you won't see huge achievement drops for the following reasons. One is parents will take up the slack. They will tutor. There's pervasive tutoring. As well, oftentimes parents have taught their children from early on. It's a cultural reflection of certain cultures that the parents will have taught their children basic arithmetic before they even entered class.
This reminds me somewhat of the reading issue, and that is that most of the studies have indicated that most students will learn how to read regardless of the program that we use. And the controversy arises in terms of reading with ways of teaching reading to those students who are not finding it easy to break that code. Again, for most students, the reason why we've been people always ask me, why do we have a different reading methodology for every decade? Because you know what? For most students, it really doesn't matter. They will learn how to read. But there's a group for whom there's a big achievement gap, and they're not learning how to read. Is it the same issue then with math?
To some degree. What is not controversial is the topics, the subjects, the content that's to be taught. We should be able to find agreement on the fact that arithmetic is important, that the traditional algorithms for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division are non-controversial. Those should be in any program that we begin with. And then we can proceed into different ways to reach different children who have different learning abilities. But the content has to be there, and that is what's controversial.
Now, of course, if we're looking about how math used to be taught, I do have to say that I was recently in Macy's and there was a 20% off sale, and everyone around me I could see was having a really hard time figuring out what they were going to be paying with their 20% off. So it seems to me that as a nation, that as individuals, we really seem to have some severe math deficits. And I remember as a child going shopping with my mother, who is from Europe, and she went to the grocery store and she added up everything in her head while the gentleman was writing it on the brown paper bag, and she would say, boy, what's taking him so long? I never had that ability, even though I was a pretty good math student. I could never just add up all those numbers. So what do you think is happening with how children in Europe and Asia are taught math compared to how American children are taught math? And not just today, but even in the past.
Even then, because in fact, the European countries, Russia, they have been our example for a long time in terms of superior instruction. And you can see it among Asian communities, even here in New York City. There's a difference in their approach.
What's their approach?
One of the things is that children are asked to practice their skills. There's some explicit instruction involved. The children have in their bones the basics of arithmetic, so that if you go to Macy's and you want to know what 20% off is, you know that's 1/5. I mean, there are different ways to calculate, and any of those
ways to calculate it.
And I would say that if you look at not only the trends in national assessments, but in the reports we're getting from the faculty at the undergraduate level in our colleges and universities, both locally and nationally, what we're seeing is children are coming in, well, they're not children, young adults are coming in knowing less and less than they did before. So, of course, there's the example of people who did not thrive in their particular math instruction in this country over many, many decades. But it's also the fact that there are certain very distinct differences in the programs and the approaches used today from mid-'80s that have put us even further behind.
I want to play devil's advocate, because you mentioned the earlier example of asking students to work in groups to find the solution to a multiplication problem, and the different ways they might find that versus maybe the way I would do it, just the carrying and the crossing out. But what's so terrible about children having a conceptual understanding? I mean, you know, when I multiply and add, it's rote. I do get the right answer most of the time, but it's rote. And I don't really think I give much thought to the concepts that are underlying the things that I do, the algorithms that I use to get to that answer. So what is so wrong about asking students to have an understanding of the concepts?
Well, now you mentioned a couple of things. One was group work, which is absolutely fine.
Okay.
Group work is fine, and children sometimes learn more from their peers than they do from a teacher. There's nothing wrong with group work.
Okay.
And of course we want conceptual understanding. There is no one who doesn't want conceptual understanding. However, there also is the fact that in basic arithmetic, the purpose of these procedures is that so that you get to the point where you don't have to think about it anymore, so that you can go on to levels of mathematics where it becomes a lot more interesting and it becomes more creative and wonderful in the applications. If children are still struggling with basic math facts and ways to solve problems in an alternative method that everyday math espouses, such as lattice multiplication.
What is lattice multiplication?
Well,
sorry to stop you, but
yes,
I never even heard of it.
You can find it on our website, or you can find it on the Everyday Math website, or in lots of books. It's boxes, like a lattice, a fence lattice, I guess, and it's a structuring of the long division algorithm in a different way that comes out with a proper solution, but it doesn't teach place value, and it also is not useful beyond the teaching of it at the particular level. And what we have to be able to do, we have to be able to bring the children to a place when they enter middle school where they are prepared with the math they need to begin the next level. Math is hierarchical, it layers. You can't jump around as everyday math does. You can't ask for partial mastery. You can't emphasize alternative procedures to the exclusion of the traditional methods and then advance the children into algebra. It doesn't work. The children are not
would
prepared.
the drill and kill accusation apply to what I mean, in other words, when people look at reading and they looked at what used to be an over-reliance on phonics, that's why we moved away from that, and now we're trying to find some middle ground. Would it be a concern to you that this emphasis on math algorithm might result in the drill and kill approach, and why not? So
well, first of all, there's no one advocating for a program that is nothing but drill.
Okay,
that's not even close. What we're concerned about is the fact that the arithmetic has been taken out of the programs, and also the fact is children do need to practice anything. If you look at the way someone learns tennis, or the way someone learns to a musical instrument, or an actress learns to prepare for a performance, there's an aspect of memorization that's important. There are aspects of that skill and that art that requires mindless activities. In other words, you want to bring children to the point where they don't have to think what 4 times 8 is. They don't need to do this. They don't need to draw pictures. They know it, and then they can move on, and they can be free to advance into more interesting mathematics.
Okay.
So that it's just a matter of balance. There are 3 components in math instruction. There's skills, there's concept development, and there's problem solving. All 3 of those must be there, and they must be balanced. And that is what is egregiously missing in a program such as Everyday Math and in a program such as Turk Investigations. It is absolutely imbalanced in the extreme.
Now, there is a program that I've been reading about called Singapore Math, and that supposedly has been very successful. What do you know about Singapore Math, and are you an advocate of it?
Well, Singapore Maths is a very popular program in many areas.
Are New York City schools, any New York City
New York
schools using
City
it?
has very limited use of Singapore. It is used in several of the highest performing elementary schools. It was not chosen by Chancellor Klein. One thing about Singapore primary math, there are several editions of Singapore, and we want to make sure that we're talking about the Singapore math program that reflects the instruction in Singapore. Singapore's top in the world. Those kids have their arithmetic and their mathematics down cold, and they are the highest achieving at points in time of any other nation on the TIMSS, which is our international test. Now, the program Singapore Primary Math is exactly the program that the students were using in Singapore when they were achieving these incredibly high top in the world scores. What makes Singapore Math so wonderful is that it really does what some of our so-called reform math programs, such as Everyday Math, promise to do but don't deliver on. The content is there, the conceptual development is there, the problem solving is very sophisticated. And so you will see, for example, in 4th grade Singapore, an amazing accomplishments on the part of the students because they've been prepared in the earlier grades, they know their arithmetic, and the complexity of the problems that they are solving is really phenomenal. It requires multiple steps to solving a problem where most of our children are doing just one step, very simple problems, if at all.
And what do you see then as the role of teacher education in preparing our students for success in math?
All of this hinges on what has been going on in our schools of education and what must change in our schools of education. Our schools of education train our teachers, and they also are involved in the research and development projects that involve our children in many areas of education. And it is rather remarkable that in most schools of education, teachers that are going to work with children in kindergarten through 5th grade or 6th grade, elementary school teachers, to receive their degree, do not have to take but maybe one math course. They're not required to take the math that they really do need. And this is extremely problematic. That has to change.
Okay.
The teachers need to learn math to the degree that they'll be prepared to teach.
In the minute that we have left, I want to ask you, what can parents do to improve their children's math education?
Well, first of all, they need to know what their children are being taught. They need to become familiar with the program. They need to look at what's coming home in the backpacks. They need to follow up with what's returned to the school. They need to go on the internet and find out information about the programs that their children have in the schools. And what we're finding in oftentimes, many cases, is that parents have to take the education in the math into their own hands. Unfortunately, this is what a parent has to do first and foremost before anything else, is take control of their children's math education if their children are attending a school that uses everyday mathematics or Turk investigations.
What can a parent do with a young child? I mean, are there things we can do for our preschoolers to help get them ready for math, to understand math a little better?
Yes, I mean, there are all sorts of things you can do, and we see it in books at Barnes & Nobles and everywhere. You integrate mathematics in all of its forms in a child's experience from the very beginning, when they're still infants, and in playing and counting and separating, sorting and patterns, and the children, and cooking with children is another way. And
yes.
There are many wonderful ways to bring mathematics into a child's experience, and they think it's fun. Contrary to popular belief, children really have a great time in learning things, in knowing things well. They're proud of themselves when they know their multiplication tables, and when they're doing real math. It makes them feel good, and it makes them feel powerful, and that is what we're denying our children by not teaching them arithmetic in these programs.
We're going to give Jim Carney's guest the final word. We'll go back to the NYU Courant Institute and hear what's at stake in math education.
What's at stake?
What's at stake is the future prospects of the younger generation and of the society as a whole. Can't get any bigger than that, I would say. That's to say, it matters both at the level of the individual family, parent and child, and it matters also for the society as a whole. It's a great concern that we're not doing as well as we should be doing competitively, that our curricula are not adequately rigorous, that the kids are not getting all the instruction they should get, that they're not being stimulated by concrete mathematics, substantive mathematics as much as they should be, and that many of our kids are at a disadvantage, which will affect them in ways that are painful. And we don't want that to happen. We want them to thrive.
Oh man, there are a lot of countries whose kids take very seriously proficiency in math skills. This is an important factor in modern economies. They're going to eat our lunch. They're already eating our lunch. You know, the Indian schools India has a long mathematical tradition, and some of the strongest mathematicians in the world are Indian, and there are some Americans and Russians, and math talent is uniformly distributed. But if you don't respect it, and you don't nurture it, and you don't give kids, do your best to give every kid the opportunity to do real math as opposed to fake math, you're going to fall behind.
Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites.
Many schools are experimenting with replacing textbooks with e-books. To judge the effects of the potential switch, California State University conducted a digital textbook rental program to gauge how well the e-books worked for students. They report 3 major findings. More students purchased e-books than physical textbooks, the digital material was easy to use, and students mentioned the benefit of the lighter weight e-books. E-books did not, in the end, provide most students with a satisfactory experience. Only a third liked the experience, with the remaining either neutral or dissatisfied.
And now for some economic news for our CUNY colleagues. If you didn't already know it, a new study by the American Association of University Professors reports that university faculty salaries are only slightly better than last year's and continue to not keep up with inflation. Overall, professors in private colleges and universities outpace their colleagues working in public higher education. In other words, professors at NYU and Columbia earn more than faculty at CUNY. In addition, nationally there is an ever-growing reliance on part-time faculty and non-tenure track positions. Yet, during this recessionary period, AAUP reports that the average salary increase for college presidents was twice the average faculty salary increase at public institutions and nearly 3 times the faculty salary increase at private institutions.
Treating children as gifted may actually make them so. Education Week reports on a North Carolina program called Project Bright Idea that demonstrates that at-risk students who are taught as if they are gifted and talented performed better academically. Teachers in this study received intensive professional development aimed at instruction for gifted children. The implications are clear. Dumbed-down instruction for children perceived as academically troubled is the wrong way to go. Instead, all children should receive a challenging curriculum.
Do kindergarten kids need iPads? A Maine school system thinks so, and they unanimously voted to require the iPad 2 for all its kindergartners next year. The district estimates this will cost about $200,000, including a special deal with Apple. So, what do you think? Is it ever too early to give our children technology? Does the iPad belong in kindergarten? What should the work of kindergarten be? Let us know what you think. Write to us at cunyedcast@gmail.com.
I hope they have insurance on those iPads and that they're peanut butter and jelly proof.
Absolutely. And that's it for this edition of Edcast.
Thanks for watching. Until next time, class dismissed.